Hello. In this video, I want to look at an article I wrote a couple years ago, which was finally published in December of last year. And when I finished it and submitted it in what must have been May of 2019, I remember I was at the Toronto airport just proofreading it and finally submitted it to a journal at the airport there. And I looked over at my wife, who is Thai, and I said, I'm more proud of this research than any research I've ever done. And the result, as far as the reviews and the journal it got published in, didn't really correspond to my pride for this research, nor do I think the quality or ranking, at least, of the journal in which it was published, Asian Journal of Agriculture in Indonesia, the ranking, we should say, not the quality, because my research is in it. I don't think that reflects the quality of the research or the merit of the research. And so after this one especially, I became a little bit hesitant to engage in the lengthy and often brutal process of peer review, which to me, in many cases, is a screening process whereby reviewers and journals sometimes exclude or deny articles with a lot of merit, but ones which aren't marketable or following standard in-group type of thinking that we see in academia, right? So this is an economic article, primarily an agricultural economic article, and I start off with an introduction about a little bit of history of Thailand and how their political situation has affected the main economic sector as far as employment goes, which is agriculture. And after a little bit of literature review, I go straight into the statistics, which is why I was particularly proud of this article, because I had first, in the research phase, I looked at Thai government data and ASEAN international data, and then some other data from the World Bank and United Nations and things, and just kind of triangulating the issue of farm productivity, and then with ASEAN opening up the economic community, again triangulating the issue of memorandums of understanding on free movement of goods and people and services, to wit, agricultural workers into Thailand, where the primary agricultural regions are seeing a reduced workforce due to aging populations and then net migration out, right? So one trend we found over 10 years, 11 years, was that the urban population is increasing and the rural population is decreasing. That's pretty standard. And then the percent of labor in agriculture is decreasing. Again, that's pretty standard around the world. As countries' national income goes up, participation in agriculture goes down. But for Thailand, agriculture still plays a central role in the day-to-day lives of large portions of the people. If even 30-some, 1 in 3 workers are in agriculture, then certainly another 1 in 3 are in some way participating in food-related services. That's just a guess, but probably 1 in 4. I'm certain that over half of the Thai economy relates to food in some way. It's a very big part of life there. All right, so we've got urban and rural populations. You can see urban population is mostly around Bangkok and then a little bit in Chiang Mai. And then the percent of labor force in agriculture, right? In the Isan region, the northeast, that percent is the highest. In Nakhon Ratchasima, it's quite high. And then a little bit in the south too. Also in Chiang Mai, you see high participation in agriculture. But the shift into urbanization is more down in the Chonburi and especially Bangkok area, and I've actually excluded Bangkok from this map here. Right, so working with the data tables that I got from both the Thai Government Office of Statistics and the World World Bank and United Nations, I was able to use Microsoft Excel in combination with Bing Maps to come up with these color-coded maps by province, which compared to states in the US, provinces in Thailand are roughly a very small portion of the size of states. So they're more like counties in the United States, or maybe prefectures in other places. Whereas these international maps with the color coding, not so reliable because you see vast differences between geographies within countries. This by county or by small countries provincial maps, these provide a fairly robust tool for comparison, right? So by comparing each county or province, we can see a fairly accurate or reliable measure when we look at the map, right? So now if we took the whole country and compared that even to the neighboring countries, it wouldn't be as reliable, but we can see variance within the country and among the 77, 78 provinces in Thailand in such a relatively small space. We're not going to see broad variance within a province. Now there is some, there's a main city up in this province, there's a main city in this province, which does skew it slightly within the province. However, it's still quite a robust tool for comparison. And so what we have here is work permits, right? So if the population is increasingly urban and labor force participation is lower, then we would like to see more work permits in agricultural counties or provinces, but that is not really what we're seeing. We're seeing most work permits issued for counties or provinces where tourism is high or where industry is high or where GDP is otherwise high. And we know that labor in agriculture is not a high GDP per capita sector, and so we can infer that GDP is going to be lower, provincial GDP or GPP is lower where agriculture is a higher share of the GPP. And that's exactly what these maps show us. So the percent of land under agriculture by province is the lower right here, and the percent of GPP in agriculture sector is up in the right. So the provinces where we have darker colors, percent of land under agriculture, we're not going to have as high of work permit issuance, and then we'll see later also we're not going to have as high, like in the Isan region, this is the poorest region in Thailand. The south is not nearly as rich as the central Bangkok region. And that's not coincidentally related to labor force participation in agriculture. So I was able to split up those main regions. That's why I color-coded green, blue, pink, and yellow here. I was able to split up these regions and then compare work permits, GPP in agriculture, and GDP per capita. And we can see with the exception of Chiang Mai, then GDP per capita and percent GPP in agriculture are inversely related. So if a county or province has high GPP in agriculture sector, has low GDP per capita, right? And that's not necessarily not the case in Chiang Mai, but we have a high work permit issuance in Chiang Mai largely because of the tourism sector, and there's a large city, the capital of the north there, which brings in construction and industry also. So also inversely correlated, or maybe even uncorrelated, I suppose. I think I ran some correlations later using SPSS. But just based on this color coding system, we can see the lighter ones, GDP per capita, are the darker ones with agriculture, and that's intuitive. And all but Chiang Mai, which is an outlier as far as work permits, and then Chiang Rai, I suppose, also. All of these in here have very few work permits, whereas several of them have high agriculture participation. And so we can see that agriculture is not a big draw on work permit applications. And the same trend goes through the other regions, right, where we've got high agriculture participation rates relate to low You can see those dark blue colors here, that's high agriculture participation. Light blue, that's low GDP per capita. Light blue over here, that's low agriculture participation, is dark blue GDP per capita. And then in this northeastern region, the Isan region, it's more pronounced that work permits are inversely related to agriculture participation and positively correlated with GDP per capita. So the higher productivity and higher wage industries are bringing in more income. They're also bringing in more work permits. And the same trend continues throughout the regions. So again, I was able to use Excel to take data from the Thai government offices, these tables here, and then through the magic of the internet, select cells with the provincial names. And I had to change a couple of them because the Bing didn't recognize the spelling, but select the names of the provinces, and then the data, which I used the most recent year. And it came up with this color coding system, which was awesome. It added just a nice visual. And then through some tailoring of the keys and the data labels, I was able to come up with these illustrations here, which provided a lot of depth to this research and really gave it that visual pop that I had not had before, which is part of why I was really quite proud of it. And so a little bit of discussion, right, about what I recognized just upon looking at these color-coded maps follows here. Then we get into agriculture inputs and outputs. Well, politicization of agriculture had a negative impact on agriculture overall. I did run some ANOVAs, or analysis of variance, within the data using SPSS. And that'll tell us if a specific measure differs between groups. For example, Thailand's mean political stability rating for 2006 to 2016 was statistically significantly lower. That means that P was less than 0.0005 or highly statistically significant. So they were less politically stable by these measures that the World Bank put out than all these other countries, right? And we can infer that the coups and the Shinawat family impeachments and prosecutions definitely played into that, right? These also affected commodities markets because of a rice pledging subsidy and various price control programs with rubber and rice under various administrations, right? So a long discussion on that, some more core economics. And then again, looking at an ANOVA, fertilizer consumption. Well, World Bank also provided data on fertilizer consumption by country. And so fertilizer consumption in Thailand was significantly lower compared to China, Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, and Vietnam, as assessed by an ANOVA, analysis of variance. And then a Tukey post hoc test in SPSS just tells us to what extent are these differences between groups. The ANOVA will tell us, is there a statistically significant difference between the groups? And then the Tukey test will tell us Thailand is different from these countries, not different from these countries. It'll assess each individual group against all of the other groups. And then the same tests, ANOVA and Tukey post hoc, revealed overall crop yields in Thailand were statistically significantly lower than in China. And so then we would think perhaps this would lead to a question of, is the lower fertilizer consumption what's actually causing, or is it related to this lower crop yield compared to China, Indonesia, Korea, Laos, Myanmar, UK, US, Vietnam? Or could it be some other variable relating to soil quality or farming methodology or something? Okay, and I'll get into some discussion of that. There's also a capital disconnect where in Thailand, there are very few, there are some, but there are very few large agricultural companies. And so most of the agriculture sector is in smallholders, family farms, and some medium-sized enterprise. But we've got mostly a lot of family farms. And so those agriculture producers don't have access to capital except maybe through the Bank of Agriculture cooperatives and collectives, which offers these special loans to individual farmers. They engage in some microfinancing. But the average farmer is largely disconnected from capital markets, so they aren't able to buy machinery, they aren't able to invest in more scientific tools that would help them to increase their crop yields and drastically revolutionize their farming methods. So looking at the percent of province under paddy, that's the green one here, we can see that the Isan region and then the central region, the lowlands, and then the lowlands in the basin, irrigation canals of irrigation rivers of the Isan region are the main rice producing regions. And Thailand is a major rice exporter in the world. Its rice production is very important for world food stability. And then we've got annual rice production by province. You can see that land under paddy definitely correlates to rice production. And then rice yield almost looks inversely correlated, or certainly doesn't look like the Isan region here, which has a lot of land under paddy and produces a lot of rice, doesn't have very high yields. So something is definitely going on in that Isan region, which we'll look at in a moment. Whereas in the central region, we've got high percent of land under paddy, and then we've got high output total, and then pretty high yields. So this land is probably just more fertile. This Isan land is probably less fertile, and we'll get into that discussion in a moment. But looking at this data, especially on the map, I was able to understand geographically what was going on, and then that led me to question other variables besides farming methods and fertilizer usage that related to yield. And it ultimately led me to another reason here, which I'll get into in a moment. So then we have also some standard economic graphs over time showing trends, fertilizer consumption and yield. Well, we've got rising and then slightly falling fertilizer consumption. If we look at the trend line, rising and then peaking fertilizer consumption, and the peak for yield they experienced peak in yield before peak in fertilizer consumption. So they went past that peak in yield and still continued using more fertilizer, which could have led to falling yields, or there could have been other factors like drought or irregular rain patterns or natural disaster like flooding. There wasn't actually a big flood in here, so I suspect that was part of what happened with the yields in that year. But you can see the peak here in yield definitely occurred before peak in fertilizer consumption. So it's possible they're using too much fertilizer, even though it's less than other countries. Right, we can see then also on the left trend line for production indices of paddy, rice, fruits, and vegetables. You can see paddy rice production rose and then fell. Fruits have been sort of flat, and then vegetable production has been consistently falling since 2005. Cereal production, lower right, cereal production, and then the trend line. So the average cereal production between 2008 and 2017 is down. It did go up, it peaked, and then it fell. So something is happening in Thai agriculture production where all of these trends are suggesting it was going up, it was increasing, and then it peaked and fell. And then vegetables just fell all the way through. Right, so one of the related topics was that there's apparently a labor shortage. Right? Even though there are these bilateral and mutual lateral recognition agreements on labor migration, agricultural work permits still lack those industrial jobs, right? Even though agriculture is in need of greater number of workers. And so, again, looking back at the data from the BEAC, I think the journal may have misplaced this table, or the proofreaders before final production print may have misplaced this table. But the BAAC has a lot of outstanding loans. They've also got a lot of bad debts and a lot of non-performing loans. And so it's questionable whether even the small-time lending scheme that it has developed for small-time farmers is useful. So farmers are cut off from capital markets. They've suffered declining yields, and overall production is down or flat, at least, across many years. And so they are at a relatively crucial point, especially with the pandemic now. That's completely wreaked havoc on the economy. So labor migration may be something that the country can look at, but then management of that labor migration is important. So I ran a Pearson correlation that showed that the number of provinces' work permits issued showed a high positive association with GPP, and provincial work permits shared a strong negative correlation with the proportion of land under paddies. So it did confirm that assumption that we could have made just based on what the maps look like, that the higher a province's GPP, the higher the income, the less land is under agriculture, the more the economy is based in industry and other mercantile shops and things like that, not agriculture, because agriculture, by comparison, is a low-income industry or low-income segment of the economy. And in fact, agriculture is getting fewer work permits, and so provinces with higher agriculture participation are getting fewer work permits. But there are a lot of job vacancies in those regions, right? So agriculture, you can see in this graph here, again, all from these tables that we've got job vacancies, right? Jobs, work permits, GDP, percent GPP, GDP from agriculture, agriculture versus non-agriculture, crop index. So all these tables in Excel led to these graphs and figures in the final document. So the data tables that I found online translated through SPSS and Excel into these forms where I could represent them in graphs and tables and then charts and even maps, enhanced at least the visual appeal of the article, and it made it so readers could be more engaged with the data rather than me just using words and some numbers interspersed with those words to explain what was going on. I could write some paragraphs, which are important, of course, in research, and then show a number of figures where readers could just look at the data as represented. If they really wanted to, they could go to the internet, use my references, go to the internet, download the data, and work with it themselves. But they could engage the data and see it represented visually such that it's rather intuitive, that if here we have on the left job vacancies by month, you can see it goes up and down and kind of follows the crop cycle. Right, you've got planting season, job vacancies, planting season and harvest season, right? And then in the low period here on the crop cycle, you've got the lowest number of jobs, job vacancies, right? In the Northeast and North especially, where participation in agriculture is paramount. But then we've also got over here the polynomial trend line for agriculture. There's your crop cycle for agricultural production, and you can see some regions in some types of farming, they're going to plant twice in the year, they're going to harvest twice in the year, depends on the type of rice. And then others are only going to plant once. But certainly the winter months, November, December, is down. But this is over a number of years. Agricultural production went down, went up and then down, so we peaked back in 2009 and then fell through, I think, the floods here. There was flooding somewhere in this region here, and then came back up, and that followed basically the yield and production here, up and down, up and then down. But you can see that the total migrant stock versus migrant stock in agriculture. So we got total migrant stock increased and increased, but the migrant stock in agriculture here decreased, even as the industry was trying to sustain those gains that we saw here. So the migrant stock went up here, and then that perhaps led to a rise in yield and a rise in production, but then dipped and went back into the negative territory before it came back to where it was 10 years before. And that's kind of following where production is. Now, which caused which, we don't know really direction of causality. But we can certainly see what looks like a relationship between migrant stock and agriculture versus agricultural production and yield. Whereas for the rest of the economy, migrant stock just increased all the way through. And you can see here in agriculture being green, really agricultural work permits only started in those last couple of years available here. Whereas in the services and industry, it had been going quite strong for a while and increasing all the way through. And so what I found was that looking at those maps, infertility, soil infertility, seemed like it might have been problematic. And in fact, that's what I found, that there was great salt basins underlying a lot of the water resource, underlying a lot of the alluvial plains in that region. And I found that through Thailand land development. I had enormous amount of data on the types of soils in all the different places. And so I was able to create a map based on the salinity, soil quality, the salinity of soils in all of these different provinces, because each of these soils had each of these different provinces had different types of soils that the government had gone out and collected data on and then put them up online. So it was really a robust set of data that I was able to use to discover what was going on in Thai agriculture and then write a nice report out of it, which is, again, why I think this was probably the best research I'd ever done, which is saying a lot, because I've had a couple of nice pieces of research published in a couple of fairly highly ranked journals. So following or going along with the rising and then falling and then stabilizing migrant flows into agriculture, crop productions, crop yields, peaking yields and then peaking and falling fertilizer usage, we've seen some, just in markets, we've seen a lot of range and movement in agriculture, which is disturbing actually, along with the entire trend of that rise and fall, right? The overall economy wants to see rise and rise. They want to see rise and fall. And so we've got price and production industries and price trend lines for all agricultural products. So prices go up and down through the year, of course. So production goes up and down through the year, of course. Production being cyclical along with the seasons. You can see a spike, obviously, in the harvesting season, and then it needs to grow after they plant, and then a spike in the harvest season. And then a couple of crops have 2 harvests during the year. But the prices over a number of years rose and then fell, which is disturbing when the inflation and price indices for the entire economy are rising and rising, and they're not showing the same trend. So price indices over more than 10 years, nearly 15 years, don't keep up with inflation, whereas the cost of living and the cost of doing business for a lot of these smallholders only went up and up, certainly outpaced the rate at which they could increase the price of their goods, their wares. So the average farmer today is poorer than he or she was 15 years ago. And the same does not necessarily go, certainly pre-pandemic, the same did not go for the rest of the country, which is perhaps why, or most likely why, younger, more educated Thais are moving to cities and leaving the farms, thus leaving an aging population that's unable to tend to the farms, which then cycles back into lower yields as less capable older farmers aren't able to handle all that much land, and certainly might have to hire out unskilled laborers. Then they can't also import labor from neighboring Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, which could have an abundance or an oversupply of labor, which should be able to, within the ASEAN framework, then pick up for the shortfall in Thai farm labor. But such has not been the case because of political situation so far, and the complexity of the bureaucracy relating to recruiting and hiring and securing employment and such. So you can see the price indices for all these different crops. All agriculture, grains, oilseeds, perennial crops rose and then fell, and perennial crops especially fell, whereas production rose and rose and rose. So that is not a good sign. We can also see on the consumer end, so this is the supply side. Well, I suppose it's also the consumer, but that's more supply side. Whereas at the market, consumer prices index for raw foods and commodities fell, right? So that's good for consumers, but not good for producers and sellers. Fruits and vegetables, well, fruits rose sort of and then fell. Vegetables fell, as we saw up in a previous table that relates to the declining production. Actually, that's not intuitive. If we have production indices falling for vegetables with lower production, it seems like we should have higher prices with lower demand or with lower supply, but perhaps there's just lower demand also that's fueling that lower production. But anyway, the prices fell, which is not a good sign. Deflation in agriculture, when food we could have argued that it was underpriced in Thailand. Deflation is definitely not good for sellers and certainly not for farmers. Meat, dairy, and eggs, you can see a lot of volatility, especially in meats and eggs. Milk and dairy, not so much, but milk and dairy is fairly expensive anyway. It's not really a Thai market. That's more of an imported market. So this is not really related to meats and eggs, which are locally grown, wholesaled and retail. Rice and flour, you can see price spikes, some volatility early on, and then a flattening. Not exactly the type of behavior we want to see from markets, whether in agriculture or stocks or anything. It's bad for producers, and even in the market for consumers, this type of volatility can create a lot of distress for consumers. So then if we look at still more demographics, most of the country is lower educated, and so incomes are going to be lower, right? Incomes are going to be lower, but that's also going to relate to how farmers are doing their work and what type of methodology they're putting into the farms, where a lesser educated farmer is less likely to rotate his crops. He's less likely to have the know-how to implement new methods, and with the capital disconnect, he or she is less likely to be able to afford machinery or expert consultation, which would help him increase yields, production, and thus income. So that's not a great sign overall. We got average national and rural annual inflation. So inflation on average has been relatively high, and I think in the earlier years, over the span of several years, that was due to a lot of this erratic price movement here. And then for all commodities and separate foods, well, rural and whole economy, this is actually concerning, because the rural economies are less able to handle price increases, whereas their incomes are usually tied to agriculture if the prices are going up for them, whereas the agricultural indices and prices are flat and declining, then they are unable to afford the things that they need to survive, and so their quality of life in the rural areas has declined precipitously in Thailand over the past 2 decades. Whereas agriculture was once a boon and a staple and an integral part of the economy, you can see the non-agriculture GDP has just gone up and up, whereas agriculture kind of increased, leveled out, and then decreased, and so agriculture is just becoming more of a subsistence industry, which you'll see from village to village in Thailand, a lot of subsistence and what they call sufficiency economy workers. So then I moved into discussion, and I think this is where a lot of journals didn't really pick up on what I was saying, because I'm fairly tied into the Thai economy and Thai culture, especially with regards to agriculture. I don't find there to be the same type of hope a lot of economists and academics like to believe in. And so what I found actually was that there is some opportunity, but to me, it's going to require a lot of government and community action group participation. So I suggested a number of different apps, right, related to and modeled after perhaps the Saudi AppSure system, where companies and individual farmers can go in and they can do all of their government activities in one place, whether it's, well, in combination with other statistical offices and strategic planning divisions. They would be able to organize suppliers and producers and consumers in agricultural wholesale markets. They would be able to provide consultation and assistance for pairing individual farms and farmers with foreign workers looking for agricultural work, and then oversee the visa processing and management. Thereafter, they would be able to develop more collectives that could then seek loans where the risk is distributed across a community, such that they could invest in machineries, tractors, plows, etc., that would increase their yields, increase their production capacity, without individual farmers and farms having to take on the burden of all the debt. And then they could share and sign out or rent or something this machinery that they would share the risk for. And so I give kind of a couple-page discussion of this series of apps that I recommended the government invest in. And although the Thai government is not in that special category, or Thailand is not in the special category of country that borrows in its own currency and can thus manage its own interest rate and borrowing as it likes, like the United States or China or Europe or something. Basically, I thought that if there's going to be an app where perhaps in 10 years a farmer can take a dongle using his smartphone out into the field and take a soil sample and then send that to a lab electronically through Thailand's very, very well-developed cellular network. And then the lab would run tests on soil quality and composition, and then recommend fertilizers and crop structuring and things based on that sample, such that even a site visit wouldn't even be necessary. That it requires a longer-term outlook than your average for-profit private company can afford to have. So I thought that there's such immense risk of a multi-billion-dollar project that only the government could undertake it. And so basically what I'm recommending here is what a lot of people would not consider a market option, and there's a strong focus and emphasis on market solutions in agriculture and in economies in general. And as far as this particular situation, given the dependence of Thai farmers on the subsistence and the King's self-sufficiency programs, given the unique place of the Bank for Agricultural Cooperatives and Collectives in the Thai agriculture sector, given the price control and rice pledging subsidies and things that the government has done over the past 20 years through several administrations, including over a few different coups and unorthodox changeovers in government, I didn't think that a market-based solution up front and exclusively were appropriate or even possible, given how things have come to be this way. But what is clear is that Thai agriculture needs intervention desperately in order to change these trends, which are alarming to say the least. And so by looking at all this data, running it through Excel and then SPSS, which I don't have on my Mac here, I was able to, again, represent the data in several different ways, which then allowed me to think about the problem and come up with different solutions, right, such that the research actually took a course that it did not expect. And the outcome was so unexpected. When I went into the project, I didn't think I would have as much interest in it, and I didn't think I might find as much data nor as many implications as I did, even in spite of the fact that, again, my wife comes from a farming family that lives in one of these subsistence villages in the Karen Hill Tribe region in the Northwest. So there was certainly an interest on my part in all of this stuff, but I hadn't considered all of these details. So through, again, the magic of the internet and the availability of publicly accessible data, along with a few key programs and some wonderful tools like creating maps that at very least makes the presentation and the representation of the data much more eye-catching and easier to interact with from what I think is the reviewer, certainly the reader standpoint. It takes the burden off of me to give lengthy, wordy explanations of things, whereas I can kind of give a brief explanation of what's going on, and then the reader can look at the data him or herself. So it was really quite surprising, and then led to my being a little bit really quite proud of this research. So I'll leave a link to the journal article page in the comments, and I thank you for watching.